So just to kick off with a sort of a brief description of what we mean by just transition in Scottish Government. So next slide, please, Keith. Is we think about just transition as both the outcome and the process. So the outcome being a fairer, greener future for all, and the process being about ensuring the way that we get there delivers fairness and tackles inequality and injustice. So in that sense, it unites our economic, social and climate objectives and aims to empower all people to play a part in the country's net zero transition. And it's also about kind of mitigating risks, capturing opportunities and making sure that those that are most impacted are at the heart of the conversation. And so in terms of how we've kind of embedded this into Scottish Government, next slide, please, Keith. We have put our climate legislation actually embeds just transition within what we do. So the 2019 Climate Change Act has a commitment that the proposals and policies set out in the climate change plan must are expected to kind of show the impact they have in different regions and the Scottish economy. So we must account for those in what we do. So I think that's perhaps where we differ from other places in terms of our commitment to thinking about just transition and everything we do. And so our first steps for doing that are our commitments around just transition plans and the need to deliver those across regions and sectors within Scotland. So next slide, please, Keith. We have committed to delivering just transition plans across sectors, sites and regions. And this was in response to recommendations provided to us by the first Just Transition Commission. And we set out a national just transition planning framework in September 2021, which sets out how we propose to meet those expectations. And some of you might know that we have we've published a draft just transition plan for the energy strategy that was published earlier this year, and we've now moved on to the 3 further sectors. So that's the built environment and construction, land use and agriculture, and transport. So they're the 3 that obviously we're kind of dealing with over the summer with this programme of engagement. And in terms of the way in which we kind of frame how we do this, so we are advised by the Just Transition Commission. So next slide, please, Keith. They scrutinise our work and they advise how best to go about our planning work. So this is kind of a brief overview of what they have suggested a just transition plan should do. I should reiterate that everyone's kind of doing this for the first time, so we're very much kind of learning by doing. But so firstly, it's about kind of setting out a vision for the sector about what a just transition would look like for particular sectors. Setting out existing evidence gaps and how we would seek to address those, demonstrating co-design and how that informs policy development. So a lot about what we're doing today in terms of engaging with people throughout the process. And then they also kind of are keen for us to sort of highlight key areas where we can have maximum impact in those sectors, and also setting out kind of strategic roadmaps and key interventions for how we will meet those policy interventions and deliver a just transition. And so in terms of the just transition plans themselves, if you could go to the next slide, Keith. In terms of their purpose, they are meant to provide certainty to those involved. So that would be kind of public sector stakeholders as well as businesses, communities, consumers, ensuring everyone understands the active role they can play in the transition, as well as identifying and mitigating economic or social injustices. So that's they're meant to be kind of guiding documents, as it were, to kind of enable us to deliver across a very broad base. And we also have a set of just transition outcomes, which is what we are attempting to meet within the Just Transition plans. So next slide, please, Keith. Thank you. So our Just Transition planning framework sets out 8 Just Transition outcomes. So these are the outcomes that we are trying to meet across each sector, and the areas that we have to kind of address. And we've grouped these into 4 key groups. And for those that might have looked at the discussion paper already, you'll have seen how they're kind of laid out as within discussion papers, things we need to address within each sector. So we have a group around job skills and economic opportunities. So, how do we deliver sort of a thriving net zero economy, making sure we have a skilled workforce to meet the demands that will be required for that. We have a second one around communities in place. So how do we make sure we meet the needs of communities to enable them to benefit from the Just Transition, recognising kind of unique strengths of local places and ensuring that it's delivered in an equitable fashion. We also have a third theme around people and equity. So that's very much about thinking about the fair distribution of costs of the transition and making sure that everyone is able to access both the benefits of what could be achieved. And there's also kind of broader things about kind of furthering equality and human rights as we go along. And then the fourth is around adaptation and resilience and environmental protection. So that's very much around sort of meeting our emissions targets as well as adapting to climate change as we go forwards. So that's a very brief overview of everything that we're trying to do within these plans, which is quite a daunting ask when you set them out like that. And then, so next slide, please, Keith. So as we set out, we published some discussion papers in June, which are kind of the starting point for the development of the 3 sectoral plans that we're focusing on this year. And they're very much designed to be a jumping off point. As Judy said, they're not fixed policy positions. They are designed to provoke conversation and discussion about what people think might be the priorities for these sectors. And I think we're very keen to understand, what we have set out in these papers, do they match up with other people's ideas of what priorities could be and issues, and what are we missing, and what else do we need to consider within those. And so just to sort of, next slide, please, Keith. I'll just kind of set out how we are. So this engagement is part of kind of 4 streams of engagement. So the first is very much based around citizens and consumers. So we're doing place-based engagement events with members of the public. We also are doing specific kind of sector focus workshops with interest groups. And then there's the public sector engagement, which is what this is consisting of. And then we also have a stream of business engagement, which is again a series of online workshops and in-person sessions. So this is kind of, how we're seeking to sort of get a broad range of views as we can on our various discussion papers through the summer. And then next slide, Keith, it's just a very brief overview of the timeline that we have. So as you see here, this kind of goes from the inception of when we were kind of starting to think about this. So we kind of were gathering evidence and drawing these into the kind of discussion papers, and then we're doing this kind of engagement and co-design process over the summer with a view to publication later this year. And I suppose one thing I'd want to stress here is around, we see this as very much an iterative process. So as much as Just Transition plans are very new and we're kind of learning as we're going, we also recognise that it's an ongoing process that will need to be refined as we go along. So our plans will need to be revisited as we do so. So that was all from me in terms of the Just Transition planning process. Very quick overview, but I'll hand to Keith to talk to the land use and ag in a little bit more detail. Cheers, Keith.
So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Keith McConey. I work for the Scottish Government. I'm leading the team that has been tasked with coordinating the Land Use and Agricultural Just Transition Plan. The land use and agricultural just transition plan, what we're trying to do is we're working with colleagues across the various different interests from agriculture, forestry, peatland, biodiversity, rural communities, etc., to try and build a picture, firstly, of what a just transition is. What does it mean? This concept of a just transition is quite new to everyone, including colleagues across government, as well as people within Scotland, within the interest groups, within possibly yourselves within the public sector as well. It's quite a woolly concept as well. People are not always 100% sure what it means, so it's great that Frankie had the kind of definition of it up there as it being an outcome that we're trying to achieve, and I'm sure we're all kind of working towards that fairer, greener Scotland. Also, the process of getting people involved in the policies and in the developments of things like the Just Transition Plan, very much being crucial to that. One thing that I'd like to mention is just quickly what it's not. I think this is quite important as well. So a Just Transition is not a plan on a page. We've just can't set out exactly what will happen in people's lives out until 2045 at this stage. There's so many things that are unknown, so many things that will change. So as Frankie pointed out, very much the land use and agricultural just transition plan will be an iterative process. We'll look to pull this first plan together, introduce the concept, set out a baseline, try and show what's going to happen over the next few years in as much detail as we possibly can. And then there will be an element where we have to start looking at things in a bit more of a strategic and higher level as we move through the time series. I fully expect that this first plan will probably be quite quickly followed, especially in the land use and agricultural sector, by another one, because there is so much happening within this space. You may be aware, you may not be aware, the entirety of basically agricultural and land use support and policy and law is currently going through a review. So, for example, we have an agricultural bill going through to give Scottish ministers the power to create new agricultural support. We have a new land reform bill going through to create new powers to work in that area. We have a review of the forestry planting grant system. We have the land-based skills review that is looking at a root and branch kind of what is happening with our educational system when it comes to agriculture and wider land use and nature. So there's a huge amount of stuff happening. So as we progress through the next couple of years, as I say, I very much expect another plan to have to come together to try and bring all these things in line in a way that people can understand what's going on. One thing as well, when it comes to just transition, you probably heard it mentioned in a lot of different contexts. Just to be clear, a just transition is not a reason and not a rationale for difficult decisions not to be made. Difficult choices within land use, within agriculture, within transport, within all walks of our lives are going to have to be made if we're going to get to net zero. Just transition doesn't mean that you don't do it. Where just transition comes in is once those difficult decisions have been made, how do you develop and deliver the policies in a way that is as fair and just as possible, and in a way that tackles inequalities and doesn't create new ones. So it's very much not a reason to come in and say, oh, that doesn't sound very good. Oh, just transition means we can't do it. It is about making those tough choices, but then working on the delivery and the development with the people that are going to be affected by it. So yeah, apologies. That's just my kind of opening caveat for just transition. If I focus a little bit more on the land use and agricultural side of life, as was mentioned, we're going through a lot of engagement with stakeholders and with communities across Scotland. What we are trying to do through that is really get a feel of people's lived experience. Ministers within our area are very keen to hear directly from people, directly from stakeholders, about what a just transition means to them and what are the barriers and importantly, what are the opportunities they see in day-to-day lives when it comes to rural Scotland, with a focus on obviously the land use and agricultural sectors. Land use and agriculture are so important to rural Scotland. We very much can't talk about them without talking about rural communities. So it is, it's a kind of all-encompassing conversation that we're trying to have that allows people to kind of voice their thoughts and ideas. That's very much what we're trying to encourage through the discussion paper. So you will probably have noticed within the discussion paper, what we do not talk about is specific policies or those sort of things within the Scottish Government. What we talk about is our overarching priority themes and our overarching outcomes of what it is that we're trying to achieve. And then we encourage people to think about what are those opportunities, what are those barriers, what are the challenges that they face on a daily basis that would affect our ability to achieve a just transition. So far, we've had many conversations. We're not long back of being on the road as well, from Hawick to Gairloch to Harris to all these sort of places. We've had some fantastic conversations with local communities, and people are really embracing this idea of being able to think quite widely about how land use and agriculture impacts their lives and what might be needed moving forward and what opportunities could be there. So it's very much the focus of what we're looking at this point in time as we build that evidence base towards the drafting of this first plan. We do have some advice and some steer from the Just Transition Commission, which Frankie highlighted the role that they play. And we have some priority themes that they feel need to be addressed if we are to achieve a just transition. I will bring the slide up just before we finish. So those are things around the need for robust land reform, the need for community empowerment, the need to restore nature and biodiversity, the need to reform agricultural support, and there's another one which escapes me right now, but I'll bring this slide up. So these are our areas that we are looking at, and areas that the Scottish Government is working in to try and bring through the types of changes, one, to achieve net zero, obviously, and two, to try and do it in that fair and just manner. As you kind of go through your discussions today, and apologies, I can't stay. I do have some other commitments I have to go and attend to, but I'll certainly leave you in Judy's capable hands. As you go through today, what would be very beneficial for us is for you to think as wide as you can about how land use, how agriculture, and how these themes and outcomes are relevant to yourselves, what you face, not just in your professional lives, but I would suggest also even in your private lives, because it is through that lived knowledge and experience that we can actually start to pull these key themes and pull these wider understandings of what people actually see and what they face on a daily basis together. Please don't worry if you're not an agricultural expert, if you're not a land use expert, that's absolutely not a problem. What we're not looking for you to do is dissect how to reduce emissions from agriculture or what kind of trees to plant where. That's very much not what we're looking to do in this conversation. It is about that wider stance on and how we create the kind of wider supportive environment that people would need in order to take the actions to deliver net zero. In saying that, so we are working closely with our climate change colleagues who are responsible for delivering the climate change plan. The idea being that the Just Transition Plan and the climate change plan work in tandem. So the climate change plan will set out the technical things that are required of the people of Scotland to reduce emissions, to sequester carbon. And the land use and agricultural plan will then complement our relevant sectors and talk about how the government is also helping create the environment needed to support people to actually deliver on those emissions reductions. So it's very much a continuation and a supporting document of the climate change plan. The Just Transition Plan isn't a document that kind of overshadows or takes the place of it. So there's the hope that you could read these together and see what the overarching ambition of the government is within the land use and agricultural sector. The final thing I'll touch on is a little bit just again about the state of flux that land use and agriculture is in at the moment. As I say, we are currently going through something that has not happened in decades with Brexit and the moving out of the EU, which is this complete revolution, complete transition of agricultural and land-based support. we can't give you any particular details about what future support would look like, what future funding will be available, what future asks will be placed on land use and agriculture, simply because we do not know that yet. The support is meant to be in place by 2025, 2026, and work is going on with that. And our colleagues are working closely with agricultural stakeholders and land use stakeholders in order to develop those. But what I unfortunately don't have is a crystal ball to be able to tell you exactly what that will look like come 2026. So we are working a little bit in the dark within that area. That's something that we have to accept, something that we have to try and move past, and look at that kind of wider environment within rural Scotland, and what actually helps people, and what opportunities that people see that will, regardless of what that future support is, help them work towards net zero. I'll stop talking just now. I could go on for a very long time about the ins and outs of the land use and agricultural sector, but I don't want to give people too much information. Just a reassurance again that this is not about technical aspects of agriculture or technical aspects of land use. It's very much that wider experience that you have within rural Scotland, and it'd be great to hear from you on that.